Yeah. Yeah, so that just to finish that thought, it ripples out into the world, and my thesis is that, well, in a world that's completely unsustainable, in a world where U.S. hegemony is like the kind of power structures are incumbent on U.S. hegemony, and I include like economic, um, or you can look at climate devastation, or you can look at any different ways that's going to cause mass displacement, the kind of mass displacement we're already seeing. A bordered and bordering world, a world that's contained by borders, becomes kind of a straitjacket of the status quo, right? A global straitjacketing of the status quo. So the United States is playing this big part of this border externalization, but it's sort of invisibilized because it's not. I consider it a war, but it's a war that's seen by the elite versus the poor. I mean, if you want
Yes.
to, or you can put it, but it's not out in the open. It's not two militaries going against each other. It's more in places that there's no media, that people don't see, and
Yes,
where
it's
people are
very
being
difficult,
brutalized.
very difficult to comprehend for people because of that.
Yeah, yeah. There's no there. The whole one of the whole purposes of the way that borders are structured is that people have to go into these remote places, and that makes it very difficult for people to cross like the deserts in the U.S. Mexico border. The deterrent strategy, walking days and days with not enough water, right? And then, but nobody ever knows. Like right now, it's 100 degrees in Arizona where I am, and people are walking through the desert
Yeah.
in conditions they should that are mortal, right? And that's that sort of thing's happening now, not just here, it's around the world. You can see that sort of, you cannot cross through the places that are easier, so you have to go through more death defying places to get anywhere. And this keeps, it's like a sort of population control. I just like almost think of it as keeping people in their places,
Yeah.
and that makes the status quo of empire, and whatever way we want to see it. I would say it's a multinational empire at this point, where elites throughout different countries are in alliance with each other. Um, but that's sort of like, if it's corporations and corporate profit, and keeping um, that sort of dynamic happening, which is definitely the case right now. Like corporations are still, like extractive industries in Latin America are out of control, right? Um, and it keeps those sorts of things going in a like increasingly climate devastated world. I mean, you need to have these sorts of this sort of I guess you have to like look at it like a militarized
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very military,
control.
and
Yeah.
the use of climate change and ecocide as a tool for genocide, basically, because they're constraining these indigenous, primarily brown people, in areas that are basically uninhabitable, and then using the climate change as a weapon to keep them out, like you were saying. And I had three quick thoughts about the stories that you were telling before we move on. That the assessment that you were describing with the border in Haiti, it almost sounds like a corporation. You know, they have these corporations that come in and hire a different corporation to come in and analyze their process. What can we improve on? What can we do that? And it sounds like a corporation hiring another corporation, very business-like, which is going to be a good transition into the Israel topic. But as well, that whole Bortak part, I remembered that part in the book and how the driver was eating breakfast and took forever. That part made me laugh. But I think that Bortak could also be possibly used for like vacuuming up technologies around the world. We don't have a whole lot of evidence about this, but I just see different special forces like JSOC that has done this sort of stuff before, where they're global, they're not constrained with any sort of law, and they just go
Mm-hmm.
anytime they're ordered to do anything. Basically, I mean, they could do anything and show up over there. And then the third thought was talking about the empire of borders of deterrence, like you were saying. I think that's a coincidental term to be using deterrence because that's what our nuclear policy is, as well as our space policy. But the deterrence is a multi-layered border, as you were describing, and that most people think of the border as this line in the sand on the south or the north. But what's actually the case is that we have all of these assets to push the border further and further and further away through digital means, biometric means, all these different means, even sometimes physical. But even the representatives themselves, I'm pretty sure they serve, and this is part of the deterrence, is that they said the last place that you want to try to stop somebody is at the border. You want to try to stop them the whole way to the border. That the border is the absolute last stage in this process, which is something that people really have to get into their minds. So since we're running low on time, let's just go into the whole Israel business aspect of the profiting off of the oppression. I thought that that was a really interesting term that the native had used in the book. I can't remember if it was some sort of indigenous person, I'm pretty sure, but they had said that this is a business of oppression. And so, yeah, how does Israel play into that in the whole border complex?
Yeah, sure. By the way, time-wise, I have 15 more minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
Just so you know. Um, yeah, so um, I mean, Israel plays a huge part in, and really, I mean, so relevant to what's happening now. In fact, I'm trying to figure out, like, there's in Gaza, there's a construction of a buffer zone at this point, and still remains to be seen what sort of new technologies they're testing
Yeah, that's all highly
out.
secret. And even before
Yeah.
you go on, sorry to cut you off right as you're getting started, but I'll just say real quick that there's actually a government CIA intelligence base that was supposed to be super secret that got exposed to the international community. We have American boots on the ground there doing all this intelligence work, and their
Mm.
cover's already been blown. So we have like this CIA secret intelligence base out there in the middle of the desert, and they're not even secret anymore. But continue
Yeah.
on.
Oh yeah. Thanks for letting me know about that. That's also it's right. No surprise
Yeah.
there, right? What knowing the history of the CIA and U.S. intelligence, and the utter the long-standing relationship the United States has had with Israel, and that's why the sort of the bordering and how Israel has played such a huge part in this. What I would, if we can extend beyond just the concept of the U.S. border to what I think is almost a more correct way of looking at things, which would be the global border.
Yeah.
Um, the which is fueled by a border industry, increasingly so. And by the border industry, I mean there's private companies, many private companies who are getting contracts from many different countries to build up border enforcement, immigration enforcement apparatuses. And Israel per capita is the largest the largest country of the homeland security industry.
Yeah,
I
most
think.
startups. I remember reading that part in the book that they, per capita, compared to even America, they have more businesses created in Israel. That tiny population of Israel has more businesses than all of America for these border manufacturing corporations.
Yeah, yeah, more startups, thousands and thousands and thousands of startups, and they're almost always ex soldiers, ex IDF of some sort, and using their skills, quote unquote, and then bringing them to a marketplace. And so in Empire of Borders, I went to Israel, Palestine twice. I really was focusing on these industries. So I was able to attend like a drone conference expo while I was there. I went to another one as well, both in Tel Aviv. Um, and just to get underneath into the underbelly of what I would say the global is. What is the global industry? And what happens is that the drones that I was seeing there, and many other technologies, and in this case, they were really, really high on the UGVs, which are unmanned ground vehicles, UGVs, and they had one on display at the very front of the expo, which was actually being used patrolling the border on Gaza, the buffer line of Gaza. So that was an example of something they were using at the time. This is in 2017, so this is several years ago now. But using at the time in Gaza and other technologies in the West Bank. And then what they do is by doing that, they'll say it becomes combat approved. Or there's like Elbit Systems. Elbit Systems is a company that a lot of people know based out of Haifa, Israel, with their subsidiary Elbit Systems of America located in Fort Worth, Texas. Right?
Yes.
And Elbit, they when they were the U.S. Customs and Border Protection wanted surveillance towers in 2014, and they put a request for proposals, and Elbit Systems came with this you can look it up. There's a video where they come out and they show like why their towers are the best. And one of the big things they were relying on was like 10 plus years, and they put in quotes, enforcing or securing, I can't remember what word they used, the world's most challenging borders. The world's most challenging border. So what are they talking about? They're talking about occupied territories, Palestine. That's what they're talking about. So these technologies become proven on Palestinians.
Quote unquote battle tested on civilians, which doesn't seem like it would be that good of a deal. It seems like just like me being cynical or whatever, but like hypothetically, if you are going to buy weapons that's supposed to be tested in battle and they're tested on civilians, it's probably going to break. Like you're getting screwed, like buying stuff that's supposed to be work in combat, but they're not really using it in combat. They're using it against civilians. So
that they make that point too.
Yeah.
And that's why they say they're so good at border control. That's
wow, that's crazy.
Border control is totally about controlling civilians, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of it, like you say, it's combat proven at first, but what they do is take those very same technologies and then they turn them and they put a homeland security tag on it and then turn it to population control or people control. They call it people control, I believe, border control. And then they use them all in the checkpoints or the ways that the bordering that's done there, and how they control the borders and how they control how people can be in certain places, not, which is Israel. Palestine is when you have like those highways that go through the West Bank, for example, that only people with Israeli plates can go on. If you have the apartheid system,
absolutely,
like it's so they are testing this in an apartheid system, right? That is so clearly an apartheid system that is denied, but anyone who's gone there can see it fits every definition of the word apartheid.
Absolutely, it's the only word
Jimmy
that
Carter
works.
says it. Yeah, so and then they have these technologies that enforce the apartheid, and so of course they're the best, right? And then they can sell them. We're the best at people control. Then they go to the convention. I mean, they go to the Israeli ones, which I went to, but you don't have, like, I went to the Border Security Expo in El Paso in May.
Yes.
And guess who was there? A bunch of Israeli companies saying the same thing. They're saying, oh, we have the best technologies in border control because, I mean, I think they had to be a little bit less overt.
Yeah.
Because of Gaza right now, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know where they're getting at least what they're trying to say that they've proven, right? And that's what I get from there.
Yeah, and that term that you used when you spoke in San Antonio, that it was a genocidal shopping network, like a HGTV of genocidal shopping network, that stuck with me, man, and it's so true. And the fact that they put up these surveillance towers with no ecological oversight because the Department of Homeland Security is not subject to environmental laws, that was especially shocking to me. And you continue on in the book that says that these surveillance and biometric technologies could easily be used on the citizens, and that borders can be manufactured. And there's a historical precedent of this. You talked about the Colorado like bum blockade. I had never heard of that. That was very enlightening. But these borders can be just sprung up at any moment within our own borders due to whatever reason, you know, whether it be a disaster or climate change. So these technologies are not necessarily just being used on people at the border. They most likely will be used on citizens here at home. You know, God forbid some sort of Trumpian Holocaust or something like that were to happen with Trump becoming president and him saying that he's gonna, you know, do all this crazy stuff, or anybody. It doesn't have to just be him, but anybody. But I wanted to ask one really important question because I don't want to hold you too long, and that question was about the philosophy of borders. And I had written here. It says that I found it striking you had highlighted the physical borders are not only a justification for violence, but are also philosophical and ideological borders, creating a narrative on both sides that these afflicted people have no place to be, no home. So even that guy was saying that they just come and just put down fences and divide people, and they manufacture this illegality. They manufacture people living in their homes, quote unquote, being illegal. And yet, the native people, the indigenous people of Earth, would say that we are all people of this earth. We are all home to this earth. We all have a home here. And it should all be respected. And putting these borders down, it impacts migration of animals. Historically, humans have needed to migrate based on climate change. So this is like impacting our natural survivability of the earth. But further, that these entities creating the climate change are forcing the people out of their home and then manufacturing the legalities and the ideology to justify the violence against them, profiting from the destruction of the native culture, which this is like a 21st century climate enhanced genocide is what I had called it. And basically what you had described it as well too, over and over throughout the whole book. But using this ecocide as a weapon against the native people. And that was really like a razor blade through my heart whenever I had read that, and really and brought that deep down into my core. So for me, it made me wonder, was that realization that you had, was that all at once? Was it like a snap of your fingers in one event? Or was it a building of facts, like a culminating that before you came to that realization of this philosophy of the justification of violence and the philosophical nature of the border, that it's not just a physical border? Was that just all at once, or did it take different levels to get you there?
Probably. I mean, I can't remember exactly, but that makes me think that those sorts of philosophical realizations, which are always evolving as well, right? Um, they come incrementally, I think. Not all, not sometimes there's like epiphanies
Yeah.
uh, that'll hit. Like during Empire Borders, there was an epiphany when I had my kind of definition of empire shifted from more of a U.S. centric one to more of from a U.S. centric one to more of a global, like, alliance between elites in different countries one. But in terms of borders and like the psychology of borders and I mean, I think the border itself, it's always kind of sort of remarkable the reductive way that borders are depicted in the media, um, if they're talked about at all, and a lot of times they're just completely ignored. One thing that I always come back to is there's there's some really good philosophical writings on borders, and can't remember the authors. I wish I could just say their names, but there's these they wrote about there's these two authors that wrote about borders in the 1990s or 1980s. They had this piece, but it was called "The Violence of Origins," and their whole point the whole point of, and I can send you, Brendan, I can send you this. I'll look up the article and send it so you can have
Excellent.
it with your write up.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's called, I think it's called "The Violence of Origins," and their whole point was that borders, modern border of the political nations, the political modern border of the nation states, are often, almost always, imposed with great violence, um, and that violence is then legitimated by forgetting. So there was the I think it's called "The Violence of Origins," and then "The Politics of Forgetting."
Mm.
So the violence happens, like the one that immediately comes to mind. You can think of every border, but for whatever reason, I was reading about this while I was doing the Dominican Haiti border,
Yeah.
and that border was impounded with the massacre in the 1930s. Um, and the Massacre River between Dominican Republic and Haiti was actually named after them
Wow.
after the and that massacre was what demarcated the Dominican Haiti border. But then that's what happens. That border is then imposed, and then you have to forget that the massacre happened, or
Yeah.
the Mexican American War, right? How brutal, how the United States is coming. It's really a land takeover and a violent one,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Um, and But we're told that it's a Mexican American War, so it's not like an imperialistic. We're gonna do this massive land grab with military might, um, like it was. Obviously, Mexican troops fought back as well, but the U.S. imperialism or manifest destiny, at the time,
Yes,
um,
that's a big term
was,
right there.
yeah. So so that those sorts of things and those sorts of reasonings and the violence and say this is my territory, and you're supposed to that happens, and the United States takes over Texas, and all of the 50% of Mexico that takes over Arizona, California, New Mexico, but all even further north. And then all of a sudden this border, we're supposed to think of this border, like say the Texas border, the Rio Grande, you're supposed to think of that border as, oh, it's just the Rio Grande. It's always been that way. It's
Yeah.
just been like that. Texas has always
It
been
was a
this
river.
shape.
It's always been the river.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, no, there was a very violent moment that happened for that to become the border to begin with. And then we're supposed to forget about it completely, as if it was legitimate what happened. And then but that sort of very initial violence is at the core, right? And it's like at the psychology of the border.
Yeah.
um and then the sort of then it goes, like, it will just go into many different places, including the divisions, the sort of dividing between people, the psychological
Race and
aspects of it.
God was like a big part of that. Like God gave us this land. We have the right. We're the supreme being. We're the supreme race. We have the right to
Right.
control you. That sort of stuff. And
Yeah.
I thought as well, it's interesting that you bring up forgetting, because that's the last stage in genocide. If you look up the stages of genocide from the United Nations, the very last stage is to forget, which I found that to be interesting. And then as well, one last point with the Mexican American War is, and pretty much all of the American War with the Indigenous, is this technology. Again, we have a parallel with the technology that the people of that time, the Americans specifically, were developing faster rate of fire weapons so that they could kill more people faster than the other people could kill them. So this again has a parallel with technology of supremacy, using technology to kill mass amounts of people, basically. But so we're right at the tail end of this interview, and thank you so much for all of your time. I don't want to get cut off, and I want to end it on a good note before, so we don't end it on massacres. And even though that's, like the biggest point of all of this. So at the end of Storming the Walls, you talk about how we can all come together, and it takes a collective work to get us out of this point. So do you want to talk about like some positives, or how we can all move together, or activism, or just ways of thinking about this that we can kind of come together to act?
Yeah, yeah, I really think that's what I mean. I think it's really important to be aware of all this stuff that we've been talking about and know the mechanics of it. But I also think it's super important to to um, to look at all this proactively, and in this sense proactively, and it's sort of, if borders are meant to divide, and one of the things that goes back to your question is the sort of activism, how it divides people from organizing together. Well, that's crap. We should definitely subvert. One way to subvert borders is by organizing and coming together with people across borders, whether it be San Antonio going across to Mexico, or further, right, across the world in many different ways. How many ways that we can cross borders, and that's, I think, one of the things. I think you can look at borders and this global border system, be daunted by it, but you could also look at it as the fragility of the elite,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
They right. They know that if people come together, they know that people, on the most part, are getting screwed. And if they were to come together across these borders, they're done, right? There's a mass humanity, that seems to be, that it's sort of, that this seems to be one of the things that borders are afraid of, like the reason why they're there. And I think that points to another, it's time to, instead of like bickering or whatever we do amongst each other, like this sort of unity, but unity in a holistic way. I mean, of course, people can argue and think about different things and
Yeah,
think
of course.
strategically, but that those sorts of, there's a lot more people that are tired of this than there are people that, there's a lot of people, more people that are disadvantaged by this that are benefiting from it. And disadvantage is even a way too watered down word,
Yeah.
or word, right? It's like people being brutalized by it. And I think, just for for the health, if you think about climate, like something has to be done, and sooner rather than later. Or if you just think about a world that we want to live in together, that's way better than this one. Like I for one, I'm tired of like stepping out of my door, and like my options are three corporations that
Yeah.
bring my time, and they affect my imagination. I think that we are connect. There's just so much more to being alive on planet Earth.
Yes.
With other human beings and with other beings, right? And that sort of connectiveness. I think by striving towards that, or at least having that in our sights, is very subversive to all this border systems. And I think I already, if you look, you can see those things happening, and already, and or they've been happening for a long time. And I think it's just time to galvanize it more. And I think there's plenty of new visions and to be had, and that are way more collective and not imposed, that come from really awesome imaginings of how life could be, that are agreed upon by mass amounts of people rather than imposed upon by a few. And I think that's attainable. It just like takes stepping out the door and doing it a little bit, and just sometimes playing the fool, right? Oh, I think this can happen, but not worrying what people think. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Revolutionary optimism. And we
yeah.
opened this interview. I had trouble with that word there. We opened this interview with a Native American, well, not Native American, but indigenous cultures around the world and how important they are. And I wanted to mention as we close that we opened it with that, and we'll close it with that, and that the native people of the earth, they seem to have an ancient technology and an ancient mindset and an ancient wisdom that they still can use to heal the earth today. Like whenever you were talking to the indigenous person and they said, you put this fence down here and now I can't move my animals around. How does that make any sense logically? It doesn't make any sense logically. And these indigenous people, they know how to divvy up the ground to spread out the water and use just the earth's resources in a much more sustainable way. So I think that we need to, like, once again, create space for native people to be able to voice their concerns, but also voice their hope, because they have such a clear uh, understanding of all of this that I wish that more people could just tap straight into. And thank you so much for all of your work and everything. Did you have any final comments before we close out? We got about 2 or 3 minutes.
Uh, I mean, I think what you just said is totally correct. And I remember I went to the 2015 Paris Climate Summit, and they actually gave space for indigenous people from all over the world, and had a separate, but it was a separate conference. And I went to that conference and just listened for like 2 days straight, and I'm like, oh my god, like this is way, what we're hearing is like what we should be hearing at the actual climate summit. And then it turned out at the actual climate summit, the very same people that were at the Indigenous summit were pretty much excluded. And that's like, oh yeah. And so it's like what I mean. I think that's what the guide the what we've been using the guide how we're being guided is incorrect. We're being guided by a sort of neoliberal economic system, capitalism, I guess, that guides like you have to do things this way, that way. You have to have this to get this, and all of our values, or I don't want to use the royal we, but that's what kind of is
Yeah.
implicit with all this. That you are somebody or nobody based on the status that comes from this sort of value system, which is basically capitalism, right? And when you start turning away from that to different places, there is this sort of deep wisdom, like you're saying, and particularly indigenous peoples around the world in different places. There's definitely one place to be inspired and look for not only guidance but leadership, right? The sort of leadership. So the leadership to move out of an environmental crisis, but I think like people would call it a crisis of living Earth. But a lot of people say the living Earth will survive as the humans are going to die off, right? So, but anyhow, that's it. Yeah, I think I'm just going to underscore what you said, and I have to, yeah, I have to go myself because I have another appointment.
That's it. The last 60 seconds. I wish that we could have gotten to the energy and exotic technologies and all of that sort of stuff maybe another time. Thank you so much for your time. Be safe out there, and I can't wait to hopefully see you again and read some more of your books. The audiobooks were on point. Thank you so much.
Oh, cool. All right. Thank you, Brendan.